Hello, I'm Nimatul Faiza, and in this video I will explain about the conflict that I find in Pride and Prejudice movie 2005. But first of all, let me tell you the brief of the film.
Pride and Prejudice, the 2005 movie adaptation, follows the journey of Elizabeth Bennet as she navigates societal expectations, love, and misconceptions. Initially dismissing Mr. Darcy due to his pride and social status, Elizabeth's perception shifts as she discovers Darcy's true character, and the film explores the clash of social norms and personal values, leading to a transformative love story where misunderstandings are unraveled and the characters overcome their pride and prejudices for a fulfilling resolution.
The first conflict is object conflict. So, object conflict in this film involves characters clashing over tangible or external goals. In this film, the object conflict is prominently showcased through the differing views on marriage and social standing. For the example, in the scene where Mr. Collins tried to force Elizabeth to marry based on social expectations, but then Elizabeth, or the main protagonist in this film, refuses it. Because Elizabeth prioritizes love and genuine connection in marriage, and it's leading to a clash with characters like Mr. Collins. This scene exemplifies the clash between Mr. Collins' utilitarian view of marriage and Elizabeth's insistence on genuine emotional bond. And then the resolution of the story, actually, Elizabeth firmly rejects Mr. Collins' proposal and choosing her values of love and genuine connection over social expectations. Over time, Elizabeth gains a deeper understanding of Mr. Collins' character and realizes their incompatibility. And then, after that, Mr. Collins finds alignment with Charlotte Lucas, or the best friend of Elizabeth, fulfilling his desire for societal expectations and financial stability in marriage. The next is priority conflict. This type of conflict emerges from characters having conflicting values, beliefs, or priorities. In the context of this film, the priority conflict centers around divergent views on love and marriage. For the example, when Mr. Darcy initially prioritizes social status and class, leading him to initially dismiss Elizabeth Bennet due to her lower social standing. In Pride and Prejudice, Mr. Darcy initially places a significant importance on social status and class when considering potential romantic partners, and this leads him to dismiss Elizabeth Bennet at first due to her lower social standing. On the other hand, Elizabeth prioritizes personal connections and refuses to conform to societal expectations regarding relationships. This clash between Mr. Darcy's emphasis on social status and Elizabeth's value for personal connections creates a conflict of priorities, shaping the early dynamics of the relationship in the story. So the resolution of this conflict comes as Mr. Darcy undergoes character development, recognizing the limitations of his initial judgments and prejudices. He realizes the depth of his feelings for Elizabeth and the importance of genuine connection of a social standing. Elizabeth, in turn, reevaluates her perceptions of Mrs. Darcy as she discovers his changed attitude. And this evolution in the understanding leads to a reconciliation of their conflicting priorities. Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth come to appreciate each other's values, ultimately overcoming the earlier clash. This resolution is marked by a mutual acknowledgement of the significance of love and personal connection, bringing the gap that initially divided them. And then the third and the last is relationship conflicts that is common I find in this film. So, relationship conflict arises from misunderstandings and miscommunications or personal biases affecting the dynamics between characters. And in this film, this conflict is evident in the strained relationship between Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy also. The example is misinterpretations and prideful attitudes lead to misunderstandings between Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy, and that's creating tension between them. As they navigate through these conflicts, the relationship transforms, ultimately culminating in a resolution where they overcome their differences. So the example of it, the scene when Mr. Darcy's first proposal to Elizabeth is initially perceived as arrogant and insulting, and Elizabeth misinterprets his intentions and believes him to be looking down on her and her family. And the resolution of it, actually Mrs. Darcy's true character can be known in the end of this novel, and Mr. Darcy explaining his actions and the exposure of the Wickham true nature, Elizabeth begins to understand Mr. Darcy's character and more accurately. And then the other example is Lydia's elopement. When Lydia elopes with Mr. Wickham, Mr. Darcy privately intervenes to resolve the situation. However, Elizabeth initially misunderstands his motives, thinking he acted out of pride rather than genuine concern. So there is a character that names Mr. Wickham, and they have a conflict in there, and Mr. Wickham make a more misunderstanding between Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth in this film. So the resolution of that conflict, finally Mr. Darcy recognizes and acknowledges his own prideful attitudes and misunderstandings, and then his altered behavior coupled with sincere actions reflects a change in his character that Elizabeth comes to appreciate. And then the third example is the scene where Mr. Darcy's effort to spur Jane and Mr. Bingley are misunderstood by Elizabeth as an arrogant attempt to manipulate the relationship for class reasons rather than out of concern for his friend. And then this conflict have a resolution as Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy engage in more open and honest communication. They confront and clarify the misinterpretations that fueled their initial conflicts. This paved the way for a mutual understanding and a transformation in Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy's relationship. So that's all some conflicts that I find and seen that I see in the film of Pride and Prejudice 2005. In summary, or maybe we can conclude that the object conflict revolves around societal expectations of marriage. Whether or in the other side, the priority conflict involves conflicting values on love and social status. And the relationship conflict unfolds as personal biases and misunderstandings strain the connections between characters in Pride and Prejudice 2005. So that's all for me. I hope it's quite detailed, and thank you for watching. Goodbye.